Carl Jung discovered something that would later become one of the most chilling observations in psychology. 73% of his most destructive patients displayed one identical warning sign before chaos unfolded. What startled Jung wasn't open aggression or obvious toxicity. It was something quieter, subtle enough to go unnoticed until it was too late. This sign appears in people who seem normal, even charming, on the surface. They may present as articulate, thoughtful, or deeply concerned for others. Yet behind this facade lies a hidden psychological mechanism that Jung identified as one of the most dangerous forces in human relationships. His advice was blunt. When you recognize it, immediate withdrawal may be your only protection. The sign reveals itself through a process Jung called shadow projection, when someone unconsciously attributes their own denied qualities to others. At first glance, this may look like ordinary misunderstanding, but in Jung's clinical work, he discovered that shadow projection, once fused with absolute conviction, becomes a psychological weapon capable of destroying lives. In 1913, Jung treated a patient who embodied this danger. The man was charismatic and outwardly kind, but every description he gave of others carried a disturbing pattern. He accused people of dishonesty, cruelty, or manipulation, but Jung recognized that these traits actually belonged to the patient himself. In effect, the patient had created a mirror world where everyone around him played host to the very qualities he refused to acknowledge within. The results were catastrophic. Within months, the patient had sabotaged multiple relationships, engineered the downfall of colleagues, and shattered his brother's mental stability, yet he remained convinced of his innocence. This wasn't conscious deceit. As modern neuroscience later confirmed, during intense episodes of projection, the brain can actually rewire perception, producing what researchers now call reality distortion fields. This is why such individuals are so convincing. They don't appear to be lying, because on a neurological level, they genuinely believe their distorted reality. Their absolute certainty makes their accusations not only believable, but dangerously infectious to those around them. Jung's chilling insight was that projection is not just a personal delusion, it is contagious. Once reinforced socially, it can spread like wildfire, drawing in families, workplaces, and entire communities into collective delusions. That was only the beginning of Jung's exploration into humanity's most dangerous psychological mechanisms. In the next part, we'll dive deeper into the 5 unmistakable signs of destructive projection and the 6 stages through which it escalates. Knowledge that could protect your relationships, your reputation, and even your sanity. Jung eventually realized that shadow projection followed a recognizable pattern. He began documenting 5 unmistakable warning signs that revealed when projection had crossed from misunderstanding into real danger. These weren't minor quirks or everyday disagreements. These were psychological red flags that, if ignored, could escalate into full-scale relational destruction. Sign 1. Absolute certainty. The first sign is absolute certainty about another person's motivations. Instead of saying, "I think you might be upset," the projector says, "You are angry at me. You are manipulative. You are cruel." There is no hesitation, no curiosity, only the bold claim of total access to another's inner world. Jung found this especially chilling because it stripped away the fundamental humility of human interaction. We can guess at each other's feelings, but we can never know them completely. Modern psychology has confirmed why this sign is so dangerous. Studies in cognitive bias show that once someone adopts a belief about another's motives, the brain filters all new information to confirm that belief. Psychologists call this confirmation bias on steroids. The projector doesn't just misread you once. They reinterpret everything you do to fit their story, often with unwavering conviction. Sign 2. Immunity to evidence. The second sign is even more frustrating. Immunity to contradictory evidence. If you try to clarify or provide proof that their interpretation is false, they don't back down. Instead, your very attempt to defend yourself becomes proof of guilt. Jung saw this repeatedly. Patients would accuse others of secret hostility, and when confronted with kindness or facts, they would twist these as evidence of deception. Stanford neuroscientist Robert Sapolsky notes that during moments of high emotional certainty, the brain's rational centers actually go offline, while defensive circuits dominate. To the projector, counter-evidence feels like an attack, not illumination. This is why arguing with a shadow projector almost always backfires. Sign 3. Emotional intensity beyond the situation. The third warning sign is disproportionate emotional intensity. The reaction far exceeds the situation. A forgotten text message is treated as betrayal. A neutral comment is taken as deep insult. The fire of their reaction doesn't reveal your intent. It reveals their own unacknowledged shadow content boiling to the surface. Clinical psychologist Dr. Harriet Lerner describes this as emotion that doesn't fit the facts. Jung recognized it as the unconscious leaking through the cracks of the persona. In other words, the storm isn't really about you. It's about what they refuse to face within themselves. Sign 4. The eternal victim narrative. The fourth sign is a story you'll hear again and again. They are always the victim. The cast of characters may change, family members, coworkers, friends, but the storyline repeats. Others are manipulative, cruel, or unjust, while they are the innocent sufferer. Jung called this negative synchronicity, a kind of psychic magnetism that pulls similar conflicts into a person's life again and again. Modern trauma research confirms this pattern. People with unresolved inner wounds often unconsciously recreate scenarios where they can play out their pain over and over. The problem is, if you're close to them, you may get cast as the villain in their script. Sign 5. Recruitment of others. The final and most dangerous sign is recruitment behavior. The projector rarely keeps their distorted view to themselves. They quietly, or sometimes overtly, pull others into their narrative. It might sound like concern. I'm worried about her behavior. Don't you think she seems unstable? But beneath the surface, they are recruiting allies into their distorted perception of you. This is how projection spreads. It begins as a personal delusion but quickly becomes a collective possession, a shared reality where entire groups see you through the projector's lens. Jung documented how reputations, families, and even professional communities were destroyed this way. These 5 signs, Jung emphasized, must never be ignored. On their own, any one of them can be concerning. But together, they indicate the presence of a psychological mechanism that does not stop until it has consumed relationships, reputations, or sanity. And Jung didn't stop at identifying the signs. He went further, mapping out the 6 escalating stages of projection, a roadmap showing exactly how this psychological storm unfolds over time. Recognizing these stages, he believed, could save a person years of anguish. Jung's clinical genius lay not only in spotting the 5 warning signs, but also in noticing that projection rarely appears as a single event. Instead, it unfolds like a psychological storm, a series of escalating stages that deepen over time. By mapping these stages, Jung gave us a survival manual for relationships poisoned by unconscious dynamics. Stage 1. Initial projection. The process begins subtly. At first, the projector makes small comments that don't quite fit your reality. You seemed annoyed at me, or you're hiding something. These moments can be brushed off as misunderstandings. But Jung cautioned that this is where danger first appears. The seed of distortion has been planted. If you ignore it, you may unknowingly step into the unfolding drama. Modern therapists often see this stage in early romantic relationships. A partner insists, without evidence, that you were texting someone else or that you secretly dislike their family. It may feel minor, but these early accusations often predict the entire trajectory of the relationship. Stage 2. Conviction crystallization. In the second stage, the projector hardens. Their doubts become certainties. No matter how calmly you explain yourself, their perception does not change. Jung described this as the moment when unconscious content crystallizes in the psyche. The belief is no longer flexible, it becomes absolute. Here, neuroscience offers a chilling insight. Once a belief is crystallized, the brain treats contradictory information as a threat to survival, activating the amygdala and stress pathways. To the projector, your explanations don't just sound unconvincing, they feel dangerous. Stage 3. Reality distortion. The third stage is when you begin to feel trapped. Suddenly, every neutral action is interpreted through their distorted filter. If you're late, it's proof you don't care. If you're early, it's proof you're trying too hard to hide something. Reality itself bends to fit their projection. Jung warned that this stage is where victims begin to lose their bearings. You might catch yourself thinking, maybe I really did mean it that way, even when you know you didn't. In today's language, this is advanced gaslighting, not intentional manipulation, but an unconscious reprogramming of reality. Stage 4. Social recruitment. By stage 4, the projection leaps beyond the personal and into the collective. The projector begins sharing their concerns with others. At first, it may sound caring. I'm worried she's unstable, or I don't think he's trustworthy. But beneath the concern lies a hidden agenda to recruit allies into their vision of you. This is one of the most destructive dynamics Jung ever documented. What began as one person's distortion becomes a group delusion. The danger multiplies because you are no longer dealing with one individual's misperception. You are facing a social system organized against you. Psychologist Leon Festinger's research on cognitive dissonance explains why people get pulled in so easily. When faced with another's absolute certainty, many prefer to adopt that certainty rather than tolerate the discomfort of disagreeing. And so the infection spreads. Stage 5. Collective possession. Stage 5 is the breaking point. Entire families, workplaces, or communities now see you through the projector's lens. Suddenly, you are defending yourself against accusations that make no sense from people you thought knew you better. Jung called this collective possession, comparing it to being swept into a psychic storm. In history, we can see this at work in witch hunts, political purges, and online cancel culture. Once the crowd has been recruited, rationality vanishes. The group becomes possessed by the shadow of one unconscious individual. Stage 6. Systematic exclusion. The final stage is systematic exclusion. At this point, the group organizes itself around the projection, cutting you out in order to preserve its shared delusion. You may be pushed out of social circles, careers, or even families. Jung observed that this stage left people shattered, not because of the loss itself, but because of the sheer unreality of it all. You are punished for qualities that do not exist in you, but in the projector's unconscious. The tragedy is that by this stage, escape is often the only option. Jung's advice was stark. If you recognize these signs, especially in the early stages, withdraw before the projection gains collective momentum. A pattern as old as humanity. These 6 stages aren't just psychological curiosities. They describe some of the most devastating social patterns in human history. From the scapegoating rituals of ancient tribes to the viral mobs of social media, projection follows the same trajectory, a seed of distortion, hardened belief, spreading infection, and eventual exclusion. What makes Jung's insight powerful is that he showed us how to stop the cycle, not by fighting projection head-on, but by recognizing its signs early and refusing to participate. In the final section of this essay, we'll explore how Jung's protection protocol, simple but profound, offers practical steps to shield yourself from these forces. Because recognizing the danger is only half the battle. The other half is knowing how to walk away with your sanity intact. The alchemical triumph, from wound to wisdom. Carl Jung often reminded us that the gold is in the dark. What he meant is that the very places where we feel most broken, most betrayed, or most powerless can become the sources of our deepest transformation. For empaths, surviving the labyrinth of narcissistic abuse is not just about reclaiming peace. It is about discovering an entirely new dimension of strength. This is not strength in the conventional sense. It is not about dominance, control, or retaliation. Instead, it is a quiet, grounded resilience, the kind of strength that refuses to be deceived by masks, illusions, or emotional manipulation. An empath who has gone through the fire of narcissistic abuse carries a kind of psychological immunity. They can see through facades with startling clarity because they have witnessed, up close, what happens when someone's entire life is constructed out of ego and shadow. Jung described this process as individuation, the journey of becoming one's authentic self, no longer fragmented or defined by external forces. For the empath, individuation means no longer absorbing other people's poison, but instead transmuting it into wisdom. What once felt like a curse, the tendency to feel too much, to care too deeply, to forgive too quickly, becomes the foundation of a new kind of power. And here's the paradox. The empath doesn't become cruel, vengeful, or hardened. They become unbreakable precisely because they remain open-hearted. But now, their openness is guided by discernment. They can love without losing themselves. They can forgive without being deceived. They can walk away without guilt. This transformation is not just personal, it is archetypal. Across myths, religions, and cultures, we find echoes of this same story: the descent into darkness, the confrontation with shadow, and the return with a gift of light. In psychological terms, the empath becomes what Jung might call the wounded healer, someone who, having endured profound pain, can now stand as a beacon for others still trapped in cycles of abuse. For those watching this, perhaps you are somewhere on this path. Maybe you are still in the storm, wondering if freedom is even possible. Or maybe you have already walked away but carry the scars of what you endured. Jung would remind you that the scars are not signs of weakness. They are proof of survival, and more than that, they are symbols of initiation. So let this be the takeaway. The empath's journey is not about escaping the shadow, but about integrating it. By facing manipulation, betrayal, and emotional chaos, you gain the priceless ability to recognize truth, honor your boundaries, and live with radical authenticity. In the end, the empath's triumph is not just survival, it is transcendence. And that, perhaps, is the most terrifying truth for any narcissist, that what was meant to break you has instead made you whole.